Welcome to The Link Online. There we are. Yes, indeed, we're live on Facebook on Fridays, live on the website as well, and we're live in studio. I'll just pinpoint. Yep, I'm alive. With me in studio. We're waiting for that, were you?
No, I wasn't.
Lynn Desjardins.
Hello, everyone.
And Levon Savons.
Hello, everyone.
And Marie-Claude Simard.
Hi, everybody.
On web control. And in the studio control, we have Chantal Saint-Sauveur and Laurie as well, who's learning the ropes, as they say. Well, coming up on the program today, we have Levon.
I'll speak to a Canadian aid worker who has just visited the former ISIS capital of Raqqa in Syria.
Lynn?
I'll have detailed information about encounters with police that have resulted in the deaths of civilians.
And I'll have a story about a unique and possibly world's first event in Montreal to celebrate women's most intimate parts of the body. We'll have those stories coming up, as well as some of your comments on this edition of The Link Online. All right, we're going to start off with your story, Levon, and the United Nations assessment team that recently visited the Syrian city of Raqqa. It was the first time the UN was allowed to visit the former ISIS so-called capital, and you spoke with a Canadian aid worker who was part of that UN team.
Yes, Mark. Marwa Awad is the spokesperson for the UN Food Agency, the World Food Program. She was part of a 25-member UN team that was allowed to visit Raqqa just for a brief 4 hours on April 1st. The city is controlled by the American-backed Kurdish forces and some local Arab militia now. But for a very 4 long years, Raqqa was the capital of the self-declared Islamic State Caliphate. It took the Kurdish forces 5 months to recapture Raqqa, and the city was subjected to some of the heaviest bombardment of this war in Syria. Marwa told me the damage is extensive. Most of the city is simply gone. The city's infrastructure has been annihilated. There's no electricity, no drinking water, no sewage, no phone or internet service either. But nearly 100,000 residents of Raqqa have returned and are trying to rebuild their lives there. So I asked Marwa, what is life like in Raqqa?
It's a struggle. It's a struggle for all the families that have returned. We were only able to meet as many as we could within time period of 4 hours. It was just 4 hours that we were on the ground there. And almost everyone said that life was tough. The prices of food, interestingly, are average compared to the rest of the country. So there isn't a lot of difference or gaps between the prices compared to, say, in Damascus or Aleppo or other areas. And that's because the trade routes, the commercial roads leading to the city have opened up again, and the demining has taken place or was completed in those areas. The main routes that lead into the city. So traders are able to bring in food and commercial goods from across the country, but also from Turkey and Iran, which makes the prices relatively the same as anywhere else in Syria. However, unemployment is close to 100%. Just a lot of people don't have jobs, except maybe for the traders who have assets and are able to open up shop or fix the damaged infrastructure that belong to them, like such as shops and retail markets. So we're looking at a situation where there is goods on the market, but people can't afford it, and those who can't afford it are very few compared to the have-nots in the city.
So how does it work? Where do people get money or, to feed themselves and their families?
More than 50% of the people we talked to told us that they are buying things on credit. They're literally just borrowing or going to the market saying, I need X amount of eggs or X amount of produce, and I'll pay you back when I can. So that's how the city is functioning at the moment.
And that was an excerpt of my conversation with Marwa Awad. Marwa is an aid worker and the spokesperson for the World Food Program in Syria. And I reached her on WhatsApp in Damascus shortly after she returned from the city of Raqqa, which was the former capital of ISIS in northeastern Syria.
Those are some interesting images that were shot.
And yes, and these are some of the first images coming out of Raqqa. The UN team was one of the first international teams allowed into Raqqa, which was closed. It was recaptured in October, but for a very long time, nobody could go in because the area up to Raqqa is controlled by Syrian forces, but the city itself is controlled by this U.S.-backed Kurdish and Arab militia, and so it takes quite a lot of negotiating. Marwa told me that the World Food Program hopes to bring in about 30,000 tons of food every month to help these people who basically have nothing now.
But the thing that scares me, that would scare me, is the fact that there's no infrastructure, water or sewage kind of thing. If you have 100,000 people there that have returned, that's a dangerous situation for health, for example.
Absolutely, and that's one of the challenges that all these agencies are facing, and it's one of the challenges of reconstructing Syria, because now you have some parts of the country are under government control, so there's easier access to them. Some parts of the country are controlled by other militia that might have a relationship with the government, but not necessarily. And there are some parts of the country that are still controlled by the opposition, and it's it's going to take a very, very long time until the situation there gets any semblance of normalcy.
All right, Levon, thank you very much for that. Coming up in just a moment, we're going to take a look at another very serious situation. Well, as mentioned, this is a serious situation. There's a lot of news in Canada about fatal encounters between police and individuals, certainly in the United States. But the public broadcaster here in Canada has collected information that suggests similar problems exist here. And Lynn, this was something you looked into.
It was, Mark, because CBC had compiled a big database about the 460 people who were killed by police between the years of 2000 and the end of 2017. Now, it was really complicated for the public broadcaster to do this because there are several police services right across the country and not one single official body that collects or tracks cases where people die at the hands of police. So this was a major project involving several reporters and researchers. I spoke with one of the reporters. Jacques Marcoux is a CBC data journalist. What did you learn about people who were killed by Canadian police?
We learned that a good majority of people, or the vast majority of people, either struggle with mental health problems or also substance abuse problems. So that could include things like cocaine or meth. They was present in almost 40% of cases, and mental health was also present in about half of cases.
And what did you learn about restraints and the situation that people found themselves in?
Right. So one of the key goals of this project was to sort of paint a picture of like the mechanics, like how do these situations play out. We often hear about a handful of high-profile ones, and it's hard to gauge what the pattern is, but when you look at them at the aggregate level like this, you sort of get a sense of what is happening. So a lot of the restraint cases, which represented about 30% of our data, so 70% of cases people were shot, which is a little more black and white, but the restraint cases are a little more gray, I'll call it, because preceding the restraint, there's often a struggle to get control of the person, and during that struggle, you might see the use of a taser, baton strikes, chokeholds, or even just like wrestling on the ground. And then in the moments after, when they're finally sort of under control, and they may have handcuffs on, or there may be 2 or 3 officers sort of over top of them holding them down, the person dies. And it's complicated by the fact that often those people who are dying are found to have had large amounts of substances like cocaine or meth or fentanyl in their system. So it's sort of like a very complicated situation. And
what link did you find with race?
I mean, it's as expected, and it actually mirrored a lot of other social issues, right? So in the prairies in Canada, where you have a very large indigenous population, we found that in the prairies you would have about 60 to 70% of the people killed were Aboriginal, whereas they represent about 10 to 15% of the population. So you see there's an overrepresentation there for that specific group. And then when you go in more major centers like Toronto and Montreal, where you have larger black populations, you'll see that they represent about 30% of victims, whereas their representation in terms of demographics is about 8 to 10%. So, but what's interesting is that it also, those proportions mirror other social problems in Canada. So things like incarceration rates, things like the number of children in state care. So it tells us that it's more complex than just pointing the finger at the officer on that day who decided to pull the trigger. It's a broader social context around why there's these overrepresentations of certain groups.
And that was CBC journalist Jacques Marcoux. He also said that the researchers spoke to police forces and found that several of them are aware that many of these deadly encounters involve people with mental health or substance abuse issues. So some forces are already training officers on ways to de-escalate confrontations without the use of dangerous force. Several police forces are actually asking for more resources so that they can provide more training and work more closely with mental health experts. There's much more information on this issue. As I say, it was a very extensive study, and there are lots of reports by CBC, which you can find on their website. And you can find also the full interview that I did on our website and links to the CBC information. So.
You know, it's a very interesting subject. I interviewed a documentary filmmaker not that long ago who explored this exact same subject. The documentary, I think if I recall correctly, was called Don't Shoot. And she found that the problem is that in North America, the police are trained, and the Canadian police are trained in the American method, which is that if anybody comes within, say, 20 feet of you, which is like 5 meters, shall we say, then that's a danger zone and you should protect yourself, and usually that means shooting them. Whereas in Britain, the police are trained in an entirely different way, and they don't have the kind of situations that we encounter here. And the other thing, I was watching CBC News reports on this, and they said that often the time lapse between just encountering the situation and the death of the person is extremely short, in the matter, in some cases, of a few seconds. So, and you know, it's kind of shocking. And one of the things that I noticed is also this: they're still using this situation where the police will kneel on a person's back, and if you're on the ground and somebody's kneeling on your back, it stops your heart. And they've been told this, and yet they continue to do this, and a lot of people die that way.
The back or the neck.
What'd you say?
At the back or the neck.
Yeah. So I think, in my very own humble opinion, that they really do need to take a look at some of the methods and some of the
training,
what they're seeing as training.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very serious subject. If you have any thoughts on that, drop us a line. You can do that by going to Lynn's story, for example, and scrolling down to the very bottom, and the form there to submit your comments is there. And in fact, we'll get to our comments in just a moment. It's time in the program for some of your comments to the stories that we have posted online. And to post a comment, once again, if you see a story that's interesting, you go down to the very bottom of the story on the page, and the place to submit your comments and to read other people's comments is there as well. Let's start off this week with a comment to Lynn's story on the fatal encounters with police. And Mary wrote this.
Police officers are still being hired without requiring a university undergraduate degree, so it's hard to believe the average street cop will be able to show the sensitivity necessary without an education. When it comes to matters of race, I think we have to keep principles of equity in mind, and we should not act as though race does not exist or is not a factor. It's one of the first physical identifying features of a person and still needs to be used in suspect profiling.
All right, and a story about the head of NATO visiting Canada amid rising tensions with Russia. Peter Ashcroft in England wrote this.
Putin, who served in the KGB for 15 years before becoming president, will never admit to crimes against humanity, as his right to rule is greater than his respect for human nature.
All right, we had several comments on a story about climate change and confusion over Canada's various provincial and proposed federal carbon taxes. Rod wrote 2 comments.
The science proves that CO2 has nothing to do with climate, and more CO2 means more health, wealth, and prosperity for all. Let me just say that I'm not sure where Rod, what science he's referring to, but the overwhelming body of mainstream science is unequivocal that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are causing climate change. But, of course, Donald Trump and a lot of other people still don't believe it. So you're allowed to...
A third of Canadians don't.
Yes,
well, that's right. That's the surprising thing is in that study, in that survey, said of those people, some say, well, I'm not convinced, and 11% said, no, it's not connected. And as Lynn has pointed out, we've done many stories on this, and the science is pretty darn well clear that human activity is what is causing that. Well, we also had another comment on that same story, this one from Daniel.
A carbon tax? Want to pollute more? Just pay us a few bucks. This is a full-blown fraud on daft populations who are being led to believe that pollution is their fault.
And also on the carbon tax confusion story, Amagine wrote.
In BC, that would be British Columbia, economic growth accelerated with the carbon tax. Fuel consumption decreased until 2013, the year the carbon tax was frozen, then began ticking upward again. Similar results in other jurisdictions with carbon taxes.
And finally, on this climate change carbon tax story, Wayne wrote.
Money doesn't solve problems. Solutions solve problems. This so-called carbon tax is just a money grab. If there is too much carbon in the atmosphere, then perhaps we should stop cutting down the rainforests and start planting more trees.
All right. On a story from a couple of years ago entitled More Students Unprepared for College and Real World, Write My Essay commented.
It's about getting through college, not just getting in. Ignoring what you do during the college years to set yourself up for your future is a very expensive mistake.
On the story about Canada's envoy to Myanmar and his interim report on the Rohingya crisis, Paul Smythe wrote this.
I'm in Myanmar now, talking to locals. It's a totally different story than the Western media spin. This is yet another cash grab for a bogus problem that the taxpayers will be on the hook for years. I was here when the conflict started, and it was extremists from Bangladesh trying to convert Buddhists into Muslims and killing people that didn't convert, so they fought back. They are booting out these extremists so that peaceful Buddhists can live in their own country. What country lets foreign extremist murderers stay in their country? Give it up, cash cow grabbing storytellers. It's just too bad no one understands what's really going on here. I would strongly suggest Paul Smythe call me. I would really want to hear his side of the story. I wonder which part of Myanmar he was in and what he saw there.
Formerly known as Burma.
Formerly known as Burma.
Moving on the story about bringing 25,000 Syrian refugees cost Canada $385 million, Ikasi commented.
We don't need refugees, mostly put a burden on our socio-economic program, mostly are not fitted to integrate with the Western system of life. The majority of them want Canadians to be like them and influence this stupid government to yield to their law and way of life and ignoring what Canadian values are. Any refugee should be the one to adjust to the country they are seeking refuge, not the other way around. If not, they should stay where they are and keep the custom and tradition they have. I immigrated to Canada because I like the Canadian way of life.
And finally this week, a comment on our story about Toronto's Gay Pride Parade asking Toronto police to stay out of this year's parade again. Bill Billings wrote this.
This is Black Lives Matter versus police, not the gay community versus the police. The BLM gets an easy pass from the media.
All right, and that'll do it for our comments for this week. Once again, if you want to comment on any story, just go down to the very bottom of that page, and you can type in your comment there or read the comments that others have written. Coming up, a very interesting event in Montreal.
Well, we do need to celebrate our gateway to the world.
Okay, that is a little bit of Mel Goyer, and in fact, she's talking about this event coming up. It's apparently a world first. It's an event to celebrate that part of a woman's body that she has called the gateway to the world. It's called Festivulve, and it doesn't take an imagination to understand what it's all about. Goyer says the idea is to celebrate that important part of a woman's body and sexuality, but in a fun and entertaining way. She says it's also to counter the almost universally pornographic portrayals. And in this excerpt, I asked her why she thought it was time for such an event.
Well, we do need to celebrate our gateway to the world, and which is a human body part that is still taboo in 2018. We really need to take back our power as women, as human. We want to go the opposite way of the pornographic thing. And what's better than humor to de-dramatize, or what's better than art to celebrate the beauty? You know, all the vulvas are worth, every shape, every colors, hairy or not. So we want to explore the beauty and the natural diversity of the vulvas.
Now, obviously, this is a delicate subject, and you have had some resistance to this. I believe advertisements have been taken down, your Facebook page, so on. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, there was a lot of challenges. It wasn't easy. People reacting strongly to this festival, they feel threatened or provoked. The Business Register of Quebec wanted to censor us also. They think that the word vulva was scandalous, obscene, immoral, so we have to fight back a lot with them so they can approve the World Festivals. Facebook, Instagram, all the censorship on the social media. Also to find a room. I've made like 50 calls to find us a really nice room to make this festival happen. But people were uncomfortable to rent us, so we finally find the Loft Hotel. It's 4 beautiful rooms, so we are really glad of it.
And yet it seems strange that throughout history, art has often adored the naked body, both male and female. Does it strike you as a little bit odd that people are so upset about your project?
Yeah, I was the first surprise because what I offer is not like, hey, come on, we make a naked party and without any conscience. It's 20 conferences, 12 workshops, 11 shows. There's 8 organizations that's going to be there to offer some information. There's 10 DJs in the Vulva Lounge where there's going to be other activities and prices. There's 20 exhibitors. It's funny, it's festive, it's creative, it's inclusive. So I really don't know why people are reacting so strongly. But I do have a lot of support, a lot of positive people who encourage me. So there's a lot of taboo and shame around the vulva. So we want people and women to feel better about themselves and about the natural way it looks, because we want to get away from the pornographic image that is sent to us every day. We want to go back to a more positive and natural way of what it looks like. There's a lot of people here in Quebec that want to come. We are about almost 8,000, and there's people from France that's going to come. And everyone's welcome. And I think the program is really complete, it's really funny, it's perfect. So I'm really proud of it, yeah.
And that was Mel Goyer, organizer of the Festivulve event coming up in downtown Montreal, and that's coming up next weekend, June 9th and 10th. It's kind of when I was doing a little bit of research for this project, I mean, as she says, you know, just saying the word vulva has gotten a lot of reaction. And when I was doing a search for this, I was going to one of the websites connected with this, and the CBC Radio-Canada net nanny said, no, you can't go there.
You can't look at that
I was actually
site.
about to ask you that. Were you able to actually do any internet research on this?
You know, speaking of the internet, it's interesting because in 2011, there was an art teacher or something in California that put a very famous painting by a French painter on his website or on the Facebook page called L'Origine du Monde, which features a very naked woman and a very private part there. And it's a well-known, and Facebook says, "Oh no, it wasn't connected to the fact that you put." Anyway, so something to think about there. All right, so let's get a little bit of other things going on here. What about some of the other stories that you looked at this week that you thought interesting, Lynn?
Oh, I posted something about these 50 prominent chefs who held a news conference about salmon farming off the western province of British Columbia. They say that these net pen farms in the ocean are a threat to wild salmon because they spread parasites and disease.
All right, Levon.
Well, I was following the story of NAFTA renegotiations, and there seems to be a bit of positive news coming out of Washington today. We'll see the three leaders. Our Foreign Affairs Minister, Christopher Lunt, is there as well. They're meeting to see if they can hammer out an agreement in principle, and then they'll get the other details later on. But they want to get it done soon before the elections in Mexico and midterm elections in the U.S. Derail it.
All right. Well, I had kind of an offbeat story. You may remember the Yukon Ultra Marathon race. If you don't know about that, what it is when they have the sled dog race from Yukon to Alaska or back and forth, depending on which way it is, which year it is. They also began a few years ago the Ultra race, which is marathon runners do the same course, and this can be, depending on your level, 160 kilometers or 400 kilometers or like 700 kilometers, and this is in the depths of winter. So what happened was one of the competitors, well, several actually, suffered real problems because of the cold. One of them had his British guy, Nick Griffiths, had his toes frozen, and they amputated them just a little while ago. Oh. And he's going to donate the toes to to the Yukon hotel that has the sour toe cocktail, which is this mummified toe, and you put it in your whiskey glass and you drink it and you get a...
I'm wondering what the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has to say about the sour toe cocktail.
Well, it's been going on since, 1973 or something, so it's...
I guess the inspectors don't get up there very often.
That's an interesting
But have you
one.
tasted it?
No, I haven't. I was there, actually, but I didn't go there. We didn't have time during our, reports that we did there.
Yeah, we were there, and I think there was even a problem with the toad. I think the year we were there, they didn't have any toes available.
It was somebody, but that's it. Somebody drank the toe.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Swallowed the toe, which really made them very upset.
Oh, you're giving Canada such a bad reputation. Really, we're not all that crazy.
Well, Lynn, when you go skiing this weekend, make sure you don't freeze your toes.
Oh, be careful.
Yeah, that's crazy. Here it is April, and we're having snow and blizzards and stuff. It's crazy.
That's wonderful.
No, it's not.
Oh, yes, it is.
Listen, I went to the mailbox the other day, and it's a few hundred yards or meters from my house. And when I got there, it was a snow squall that happened in these huge winds, because we had winds across southern part of Ontario and Quebec of up to 100 kilometers an hour. So anyway.
Yeah, but the snow squall only lasted 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, it was the 20 minutes that I was out in it.
Well, you're bad for going out during the squall.
But speaking of the north, your buddy Barbara. Hello, Barbara.
Hi, Barbara.
Yeah, Barbara is not listening to us today because she's on the train. She's doing a cross-country travel trip in train as we speak. She left during the blizzard on the 3rd of April.
Oh, you
from
love
Quebec
trains.
City.
They can go through anything.
Yeah, and she's not going to Yukon, though, to have that special drink. She's stopping at BC, yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a great
Have you ever done it? Anybody here?
No, I've flown across Canada, but I need to do it on the ground. I mean, I've visited different centers. Actually, used to work for an airline in my college days, but I'd love to drive across the country.
Yeah, well, she's doing it by train. Yeah.
I'd love to paddle across the country.
Heck, maybe we could talk to the boss and we could do remotes from different spots. It'd be terrific.
With what budget money?
Yeah, well, yeah.
I seem to recall they wouldn't pay you for a newspaper one day.
Yes, that's true. That's very sad.
Well, anyway, that's just about all the time we have for today on the program. Hope you enjoyed the program. And of course, as always, we're on Facebook Live and we're on the Internet Live and our website. The show will be there for a couple more days on our website. And you can comment on anything you see or hear by simply going to the particular story, scrolling all the way down. Or you can just drop us a line and say, hi, how are you doing, if you feel that way. We're doing pretty good, and we'd like to say hi to you. But right now, I guess we have to say goodbye.
Yeah.
So, from all of us here, Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.